Ireland was never conquered by Rome, so it remained relatively peaceful.
So I definitely recommend watching that entire video. Ali MC Forever has great content. She also has a great Substack. Highly recommend. I just wanted to add to this that these are things that we know. We know that there was a large amount of cultural exchange and travel happening between Ireland and other countries during the 14th and 15th century. And a lot of these cultural exchanges happened within monasteries. When we think of the Renaissance, especially as Americans, Ireland doesn't come to mind right away. We generally think Italy first and the surrounding countries. And that is in part because the record of cultural exchange that was happening and is also readily accessible to the public now is very sparse. And I'm not the only one to think this. I'm going to read now from Pat Palmer's research. Irish society in the years between Henry VIII's assumption of the kingship of Ireland in 1541 and the flight of the earls was anything but a society in freefall, heading inexorably towards defeat. Rather, it was a remarkably vibrant place where several cultural traditions and languages flourished, sometimes in dialogue, sometimes clashing. The English newcomers, agents of the conquest, funneled the energies of the English Renaissance into what was a surprisingly bookish conquest. This was a conflict where words mattered as much as swords. But what of the Irish themselves? All too often, Irish culture doesn't fully come into focus in accounts of this period and prior. Yet Irish culture was notably dynamic at this time, and writers in both Irish and to a lesser extent English captured the drama and energy of the age. Irish alchemist, poet, and historian Richard Stanhurst wrote a chronicle history of Ireland in a colloquial vernacular that captures the vigor of the English of the Pale. His experimental translation of Virgil's Aeneid anticipates Joyce's disruptive way with language. But all too often, Irish literature gets left out of the account. The culture of early modern Ireland is narrated as though Ireland were already English speaking. We rely largely on accounts of the English in state papers as well as literature for the story of the country and its inhabitants. Inevitably, that is a partial and distorted account. The victors may write history, but they do not and cannot write the full story. Irish sources for the period do survive. The dominance of English and the language shift from Irish to English, that is one of the most dramatic consequences of the conquest, means they are more difficult to access than English sources. In fact, schools of Gaelic medicine, law, and poetry flourished and manuscript culture prospered. Most remarkably, the lords of the Gaelic and the largely Gaelicized Old English aristocracy all patronized poetry. Almost every lord had an olive or chief poet who served as a counselor and advisor. Poetry was not a recreational aside from politics, it was politics. Now, given this conquest of Ireland, and knowing what we know about language, looking at the Voynich manuscript, which hasn't been translated in hundreds of years, um, and is culturally linked to all of these other countries, it would be illogical to not consider Ireland and Irish as a language first and foremost. And I ask you to look at the continued conversation we have surrounding this text and the lack of focus on Ireland. In my most recent post on Substack, which is free, by the way, all of my content is free. I don't make any money off of this. In my most recent post on Substack, I go over one of the last pages of the Voynich manuscript, which exemplifies a lot of this possible cultural exchange. Using my modern Irish translation methods and techniques, I talk about my interpretation of this part. Knowing how skewed our lenses could be in terms of historical documentation, I almost solely rely on translation for my interpretations. That being the case, my interpretations tend to contradict a lot of the current conversations surrounding the Voynich manuscript. Follow for more.